We have this beautiful Doric temple that is 2,500 years old. I'm going to try to paint a little interior of it. My palette today, as follows, is white, the cadmium, yellow lemon, yellow medium, orange, and red, quinacridone magenta, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, viridian, ivory black, burnt sienna, yellow ochre. Very little of my chromatic colors to be used today. A lot of earth colors. Earth colors and stone are super useful, super helpful, super easy. The tone of my canvas is a nice middle gray tone. So a little bit of my white, a little bit of yellow, a little bit yellow ochre, a little bit of burnt sienna, and a little bit of ultramarine blue. For the most part, I want to keep the relative tone of the painting showing through in many places. This isn't necessarily a horizon line, but I want to include what we call the stylobate of the temple, which is the base of the temple, and we see that they're made up of separate rocks. So I want to include that on the bottom, and then somewhere here up top, I want to include the soffit of the architrave, which is the underside, and then the architrave are the blocks that rest atop the columns and help set up the roof. I'm going to just start sketching in with a bit of paint and try to capture my proportions. Some of the big tools that I like using for going in for architecture is comparative measurement and shapes and seeing how the two connect to each other. So in this case, I have the shapes of the sky. The negative shapes of the sky are going to be key for finding this, but I also want to find some big heights and widths. So let me measure from the top of the stylobate, the base of the temple, and let me do that to the soffit, or the bottom of the architrave that is in the depth in the second stage. Measure that up, and I see that it's actually less than halfway. Now let me find some widths of the opening in between the columns. The width between the opening of the columns is more than this point. Let me see the columns themselves. The widths of the columns themselves are equal to this. I want to offset this. I don't want to have anything nice and halfway. What I want to do is bring in the left turn corner column on the left. And so have, looking at now the negative shape, have this slightly off-centered to the right, and then have the big triangular shape under it off-centered to the left. And I'm also going to check the angle of the pediment that we see. So the raking pediment, the slanted angled pediment. And most of our painting is going to be built off of this shape. Originally, I based my heights off of how I wanted to fit things vertically, but I didn't base it off of how I want to fit things horizontally. So let me shrink things just a bit, taking mostly white, and I'll reach for a little bit of ultramarine blue to go for with this white. Using a tone surface can be really helpful, especially when the tone relates to the subject that we're painting. So in this example, the tone really relates well to the stone of these columns, and that automatically just makes my life so much easier. All right, looking for that big angle up there. Looking for horizontal alignments. Now, let me mix up a whole bunch of color for the stone in the shadows, mostly burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and some ultramarine. At a certain point, we can really start focusing in and honing in on our positive and negative shapes to see how they are relating to everything else in the scene. Now let me continue by massing in a little bit more of light and shadow. So especially here, let me just take some viridian and ultramarine blue to capture some of these darker plants. There's some purples, so grab for some ultramarine blue and magenta. That was already on my palette. So let me mix some more white into that purple with some ivory black ultramarine blue. And now let me start adding some color variety into this painting. And I'm going to carefully find the space for the little bits of light shape over here. You see, through these columns, there's a little bit of light that's being filtered out. As we start to progress our painting, that is when we're able to see more and more variety. So whenever we first start a new painting, we are actually pretty limited with what stuff we're able to see. And it's through painting itself that we're able to more deeply observe the world. I'm gonna actually go in and pay attention to all the darker shapes that I see under every stone. So underneath all of these stones, there's a lot of character. There are some darker accents. And the one thing I need to maintain, we can push the color and we can push the value, but we always need to maintain relationships. And that's what keying a painting or keying your color key or your value key is all about. Finding the optimal set of relationships for the effect you're going after in your painting. There's a back column. So I'm going to include that. The general progression on a painting like this is first we have to block in the color and well, first block in the drawing, most important step. Then we block in a bit of the color. But eventually we want to start thinking about the material of what it is that we're actually drawing. And so using paint and the application of paint with brushstroke, how do I start to get it to a point where it starts to feel like the material that I'm looking at? That is the biggest challenge. Part of it comes in shapes of colors. If you get the shapes of colors right, that does a lot. But part of it is feeling the texture and trying to recreate the feeling of the texture, the way that we can feel the anatomy or feel perspective, feel turning of light, comes to a point where feeling becomes much more important. For this painting, I just added a little bit more titanium white on my palette. And now I want to go back in and restate some clouds. And all of a sudden that opens up a whole world of paint. You know, create variety, create interest, create texture. Does that column feel like I have captured it and put it on the page yet? I think I need to lighten and cool some things. So reaching for a bunch of the white on my palette along with a bunch of ultramarine blue. So I'm gonna pay attention to the cooler marks of the texture. Feel the warms and the cools a bit. And bring that over. Remember, one of the things that we can do instead of adjusting with value all the time is adjusting with chroma. Pushing up some of the colors towards the top of the capital. There's a lot of color variety in here. Trying to not make up these marks, but painting the exact shapes that we see there. And again, a bit of pouncing. Not all the same, but trying to get some variety compared to what we have. All right, guys, and that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the process of trying to paint this 2,500-year-old Greek temple in pastem. The drawing process was really important, how I was very carefully setting up and measuring, coupling that with some shape design, using the tone of the canvas I had, and very quickly I was able to set up the largest relationships of the color masses, which allowed me to really quickly build up the detail and start thinking about some of the material and texture of what I was actually painting. If you want to see the full video of this, it's almost 70 minutes long. That's on my Patreon, along with a bunch of other painting tutorials, mostly focused on plein air. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and catch you in the next one.